The March 9 governorship and State House of Assembly polls may have come and gone, but it did leave behind a setback in 17 states and the Federal Capital Territory. So to make amends, the Independent National Electoral Commission conducted supplementary elections last Saturday in the affected states. However, security was a big challenge, as in some areas political thugs did disrupt the process. Now, joining us in the studio to review the security situation during the supplementary elections over the weekend is Mr. Adekoya Onyekachi, security consultant. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I'm yet to hear of a major election where, properties are not damaged or we do not record any loss of life. How do we better protect the electorate when we have elections?
I think for us to get there, we're still very far from that point. I dare say it may not happen in the next 10 years. There will be a lot of noise about security, but as a nation, what's our level of investment into security? You look at elections, for example, INEC should supervise the deployment of men and security resources for the purposes of the election and for the purpose of protecting votes and making sure that things go smoothly. But the question is, what competency does INEC have in-house to understand the deployment, formation, the systems, risk assessments, the elements that are critical to ensuring a safe and secure election? So if that competency is lacking in-house, it will also be difficult for INEC to supervise and even know, like they set up early warning systems to know where the flashpoints, we talk about flashpoints, is being overflogged. But then you set up early warning systems where you get instant reports, you know what's happening, then you can create measures and mitigations to forestall some of these incidents. So I think that the security we have gotten during this election is a reflection of our state of security as a country and where our emphasis has been up until this time. We must go back to the era of civil rule, where we totally put everything under security, under civil leadership. So it's a long process. We are very far from it.
Well, that's interesting. Now, we've had 3 weekends,
yes.
Elections for 3 weekends
yes.
now. And, the expectation was that for each weekend, situation would get better. So INEC would get better, security agencies would see better security
yes.
For every weekend. But it's surprising that this last weekend, we did record security issues in some areas. For instance, Kano.
Yes.
And one would wonder, were they not prepared enough? Did they not know where the flashpoints were? Were they not, what happened really? You
see, there's a problem with the way we play politics in Nigeria. There's a politics of desperation. As we all know, whoever controls power controls the resources and access to power, then economic benefit. So that desperation would always be there. As long as politicians stand to gain more in power than they will gain outside, the desperation will be there. So it is clear, history doesn't favor a rerun election to be peaceful. You look at even the Osun elections, which the tribunal just did upturn. There were issues with that election. So I go back again to say, there must be a deliberate national security policy that seeks to improve national security from a perspective of development, economic growth, and peace. What we currently have now is an over-militarization of Nigeria's security architecture. At the apex of security in Nigeria is a former military officer. I'm not even talking about the CEC. I'm talking about the National Security Advisor. So when you have that strong approach to security at the top, we will continue to lose the essence of subtle nuances which security should hold on to. Like during the election, the police should be the lead agency. When you have the military who should be protecting the outer bounds of the areas where elections are happening, now becoming overbearing to the point where you almost had a confrontation in River State. It's sad, but that's where we are. The military obey the last order. The policeman has to be careful. If PDP wins and he's not seen to be siding PDP, when PDP comes in, he's in trouble. If APC wins and he doesn't seem to be siding APC, when APC comes, he's in trouble. So the police find a balance in managing the politicians. Sometimes they play to two sides. But when you bring the military in...
That's an allegation that I don't think you can verify.
Yeah, so it's not to say that actively. I'll give you instances. We have friends, colleagues who are still serving. If they give you an instruction verbal, you're a police officer, you will apply discretion when you're executing that instruction, because when push comes to shove, you will have yourself to answer. Who we arrest a military officer and bring him to prosecution if a military officer is found wanting? You can quickly demob a policeman and take him to court. With the military, it's a bit of a culture, it's more difficult to handle. So when we leave the police, when we talk about civil leadership in security, it means that everything security should come under civil leadership. At the apex of national security, you should have a civil person, and we should drive a policy-first approach. We are losing a lot of emphasis in security.
Now, before we get there, to this, this picture that you've painted, let's talk about training. How much can training do in the meantime?
They say that culture eats training or something like that. Culture eats training for breakfast. If you train and there's a culture that seeks to perpetuate itself within a system, then your training is nothing. It comes to nothing. Basically, there's a culture, there's a total re-engineering, a total retooling of the Nigerian security system and architectural stance that is required. We must de-emphasize this strong militarization of our security system.
So are you saying there's nothing we can do in the short term?
So we are always a short-term prone people. We must look long-term. This problem I said we have in Nigeria will not be solved in the next 4 years. It probably will not be solved in the next 10 years. We saw the Senate trying to address some issues around election security. There's a provision in the Constitution that allows INEC to oversee everything security for the purposes of election. Okay. Remember, INEC is supposed to be the independent National Electoral Commission. So there are a lot of issues with the unitary system we have inherited from the military.
All right.
So, yeah, so that's the big issue we have with elections.
Thank you so much, Mr. Adekoya Onyekachi, for sharing your perspective with us.
Thank you for having me.